Part 1. The Struggling Recruit. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training ground as Sarah Martinez stood in the back row of recruits. Her green uniform felt heavy on her shoulders, and sweat already formed on her forehead even though the day had just begun. At 22 years old, she was older than most of the other soldiers around her. While they looked confident and ready, Sarah felt like she was drowning in a world she did not understand. Sarah had joined the Army 3 months ago, after her second attempt at college ended in failure. Her father, Robert Martinez, had served in the military for 20 years and earned many medals. Her older brother, Carlos, was a Marine who made their family proud every day. Growing up, Sarah had always felt like the odd one out in a family of heroes. She was the one who struggled in school, who quit the soccer team, who could never seem to finish what she started. The decision to join the Army came after another fight with her father about her future. "You need discipline, Sarah," he had said, shaking his head as he looked at her college dropout papers. "Maybe the military can teach you what I could not." Those words stung, but they also lit a fire in her heart. She wanted to prove that she could be strong like the rest of her family. But standing here now, watching her fellow recruits prepare for another tactical drill, Sarah felt that fire growing smaller each day. For 3 long weeks she had failed every single exercise. Every mission, every test, every simple task seemed impossible for her to complete correctly. Drill Sergeant Johnson's voice boomed across the field. "Listen up, recruits. Today we are going to practice room clearing. You will work in teams of 4. When I give the signal, you will enter the building, check each room for enemies, and secure the area. Remember everything we taught you about communication and positioning." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. Room clearing was one of the hardest exercises for her. She always forgot the hand signals, moved to the wrong positions, or got confused about which direction to go. The other recruits had learned to avoid working with her because she made their teams fail. "Martinez," Sergeant Johnson called out. "You are with Team 3 today." Sarah looked over at her teammates and saw the disappointment on their faces. Private Jackson, a tall young man from Texas, let out a quiet sigh. Private Williams, a smart woman who always scored high on tests, looked away. Private Chen, who could run faster than anyone in their group, just shook his head. As they walked toward the training building, Sarah tried to remember everything she had studied the night before. Entry positions, communication signals, room clearing patterns. She had read her manual 5 times and practiced the movements in her small barrack room until late at night. But somehow, when it came time to do the real thing, her mind went blank. The building stood in front of them like a gray concrete monster. It had 4 rooms and several hallways designed to look like a real house where enemies might hide. Red targets would pop up randomly, and the recruits had to identify which ones were threats and which ones were innocent people. "Team 3, you are up first," Sergeant Johnson announced. Sarah's teammates took their positions near the door. Jackson would lead, Williams would cover the right side, Chen would watch the left, and Sarah was supposed to bring up the rear and watch for threats from behind. The whistle blew and everything went wrong immediately. Sarah forgot to check her sector as they moved through the door. She was supposed to watch the area behind the team, but instead she focused on what was happening in front. This left their rear unprotected, and a red target popped up that she completely missed. "Target behind you, Martinez," Sergeant Johnson shouted, but it was too late. In a real situation, an enemy could have attacked them from behind. As they moved into the first room, Sarah got confused about which way to turn. The team was supposed to move in a specific pattern, like a dance where everyone knew their steps. But Sarah went left when she should have gone right, bumping into Williams and throwing off the entire formation. "Martinez, what are you doing?" Williams whispered angrily as they tried to reorganize. In the second room, things got worse. Sarah saw a target pop up and raised her training weapon, but she hesitated too long trying to decide if it was a threat or an innocent person. By the time she made up her mind, the target had disappeared and another team member had to take the shot. The third room was where Sarah's confidence finally broke completely. A target appeared suddenly from behind a door and Sarah panicked. Instead of communicating with her team or taking proper action, she froze. She stood there like a statue while chaos happened around her. Jackson had to push her out of the way to engage the target properly. When the exercise ended, Team 3 had the worst score of the day. They had missed multiple targets, failed to secure 2 rooms properly, and taken much longer than allowed. Sarah could see the frustration on her teammates' faces as they walked back to the starting position. "What is wrong with you, Martinez?" Jackson said, his voice full of anger. "We practiced this formation 20 times. You know what you are supposed to do?" Sarah wanted to explain that she did know what to do. In her mind, she understood every step perfectly. She had memorized every rule and procedure. But when the action started, when there was noise and movement and pressure, everything she had learned seemed to disappear like smoke. Other recruits gathered around to hear their scores. Team 1 had performed perfectly. Team 2 had only made minor mistakes. Team 3 had failed in almost every area, and everyone knew it was because of Sarah. Sergeant Johnson walked over with his clipboard. His face showed no emotion, but Sarah could see disappointment in his eyes. "Martinez, stay after the others are dismissed. We need to talk." As the other recruits walked away, Sarah heard their whispered conversations. "She is never going to make it. Why is she even here? She is going to get people killed if she goes to real combat." Each word hit her like a punch to the stomach. Sarah stood alone in the middle of the training ground, watching her fellow soldiers disappear into the distance. The sun was getting higher now, making everything look bright and cheerful, but inside her heart everything felt dark and cold. She thought about her father's words again. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe discipline was not something she could learn. Maybe some people were just not meant to be soldiers, no matter how hard they tried or how much they wanted it. The question that scared her most was simple. If she could not succeed here, where could she succeed anywhere? Part 2. The Pattern of Failure. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's first major failure in the room-clearing exercise, and nothing had improved. If anything, things had gotten much worse. Every morning she woke up hoping that today would be different, that somehow she would find the soldier inside herself that everyone expected to see. But every evening she went to bed feeling more lost and hopeless than before. The other recruits had stopped trying to help her completely. In the beginning, some of the kinder soldiers like Private Williams had offered tips and advice. They showed her how to hold her weapon properly, how to move quietly through different terrains, and how to remember the hand signals that seemed so important in every exercise. But after watching Sarah make the same mistakes over and over again, even the most patient recruits gave up on her. During breakfast in the mess hall, Sarah always sat alone now. She would watch the other soldiers laugh and joke with each other, sharing stories about their successful missions and planning strategies for upcoming tests. Sometimes she wanted to join their conversations, to feel like part of the team. But she knew they would only change the subject or find excuses to leave if she approached their table. The worst part was not just that Sarah failed at exercises. The worst part was how completely and dramatically she failed at them. It was never a close call or a small mistake that cost her team a few points. Her failures were so obvious and embarrassing that they became stories the other recruits told to entertain each other. There was the urban warfare simulation where Sarah was supposed to provide cover fire for her team as they moved between buildings. The exercise used paint bullets that would mark you if you got hit, showing that you would be wounded or killed in real combat. Sarah's job was simple: watch the windows of the enemy building and shoot any targets that appeared while her teammates ran across the street. But when the exercise started and the paint bullets began flying everywhere, Sarah completely froze. The loud popping sounds of the weapons and the shouts of her teammates created so much chaos that she could not think clearly. She was supposed to fire at the enemy positions, but instead she just crouched behind her barrier like a scared child, watching her teammates get marked with paint as they tried to cross the street without her support. When the exercise ended, Sergeant Rodriguez pulled her aside. "Martinez, what happened out there? Your team was depending on you to keep them safe while they moved, but you did not fire a single shot." Sarah tried to explain that the noise and confusion had overwhelmed her, but the words came out jumbled and unclear. "I wanted to help them, Sergeant. I really did, but everything was happening so fast, and I could not figure out which targets to shoot at first." Sergeant Rodriguez shook his head with frustration. In real combat, soldiers do not have time to figure things out slowly. They have to make quick decisions or people die. You are thinking too much about every little detail instead of trusting your training and reacting naturally. The night operations were even worse for Sarah. During these exercises, Recruits had to navigate through dark forests using only night vision equipment and complete missions without being detected by enemy patrols. The green-tinted world seen through night vision goggles made everything look strange and unfamiliar, like being in an alien landscape. On her first night mission, Sarah got separated from her team within the first 10 minutes. She was supposed to follow Private Chen as they moved through thick trees toward a target building, but she lost sight of him when he moved behind a large rock. Instead of staying calm and using her radio to reconnect with her team, Sarah panicked and started walking in the wrong direction. For 2 hours, search teams had to look for Sarah while she wandered around the training area completely lost. She finally stumbled out of the woods near the main road, tired, scared, and covered in scratches from walking through thorny bushes in the dark. Her teammates had already completed the mission and returned to base, but they had received failing grades because their team was incomplete. The night operations failures happened 3 more times in different variations. Once Sarah fell into a small creek because she could not judge distances properly with the night vision goggles. Another time she accidentally walked directly into an enemy patrol because she had not been watching for the infrared signals that would warn her of their presence. Each failure became more embarrassing than the last. Even weapons training, which should have been straightforward, became another area where Sarah could not succeed. At the shooting range, while other recruits consistently hit targets at various distances, Sarah struggled to hit anything at all. Her hands would shake when she aimed, causing her shots to go wide of the target. When Sergeant Rodriguez tried to help her with breathing techniques and proper stance, Sarah would improve slightly during practice, but during actual scored tests she would fall apart again. "Martinez, you are one of the worst shots I have seen in 15 years of training recruits," Sergeant Rodriguez told her after another poor performance at the range. "Your accuracy scores are so low that you would not qualify for basic infantry duty, let alone any specialized roles." The other recruits began to create backup plans for every exercise that did not depend on Sarah performing her assigned role correctly. If Sarah was supposed to be the team's communication specialist, someone else would quietly prepare to take over that job when she inevitably failed. If Sarah was assigned to watch a particular area for threats, her teammates would position themselves to cover her sector as well as their own. Sarah knew what they were doing, and it hurt more than their angry words or frustrated looks. Being ignored and worked around made her feel invisible, like she was not even really part of the team. She had become a problem to be managed rather than a soldier to be trusted. Every evening, Sarah would return to her small barrack room and spread her training manuals across her narrow bed. She would read the same pages over and over, trying to memorize every detail about tactics, weapons, and military procedures. She practiced hand signals in front of her small mirror until her arms ached. She drew diagrams of room-clearing patterns and practiced moving quietly around her tiny space. But none of her studying seemed to help when it came time for real exercises. The knowledge was there in her head, but it disappeared the moment any pressure or chaos began. Other recruits seemed to perform better during stressful situations, as if the excitement helped them focus. For Sarah, stress made everything worse. By the 6th week of training, Sarah began hearing whispers that scared her more than any failed exercise. Other recruits talked quietly about soldiers who had been sent home for not meeting basic standards. They mentioned names of people who had been in previous training groups but were no longer at the base. Sarah realized that her time might be running out, and she still had not passed a single tactical drill. Part 3. The Breaking Point. The 7th week of training began with an announcement that made every recruit nervous. Commander Williams stood in front of the entire platoon during their Monday morning formation, his stern face showing no emotion as he delivered news that would change everything for many of them. "Listen carefully. Soldiers," Commander Williams began, his voice carrying across the silent training ground. "This Friday, you will participate in the most important evaluation of your basic training program. We call it the final assessment exercise. This mission will test everything you have learned about tactics, teamwork, weapons handling, and decision-making under pressure." Sarah felt her stomach drop as the commander continued speaking. She had barely survived the smaller exercises over the past weeks. The thought of a major evaluation that would determine her future in the military filled her with dread. "You will work in teams of 4 to complete a complex rescue mission," the commander explained. "Each team must infiltrate a hostile compound, locate and extract 2 civilian hostages, and return them safely to the extraction point. You will face multiple enemy positions, time pressure, and unexpected complications during this exercise. The commander paused and looked across the rows of recruits. Your performance on this mission will determine whether you advance to specialized training or whether you need additional basic instruction. For some of you, this may be your last chance to prove you belong in this program. Those final words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She knew the commander was talking directly to her. Everyone knew she had never passed a single tactical drill. This final assessment would either be her salvation or her complete destruction as a soldier. Over the next 4 days, the teams were announced and began preparing for the mission. Sarah discovered she had been assigned to Team Charlie with 3 of the best performers in the entire platoon. Private Jackson, the tall Texan who always scored highest in marksmanship. Private Williams, the smart strategic thinker who never made tactical mistakes. Private Chen, the fastest runner who had never failed a physical fitness test. When the team assignments were read aloud, Sarah saw the immediate disappointment on her teammates' faces. Jackson actually groaned out loud when her name was called. Williams closed her eyes and shook her head slowly. Chen just stared at Sarah with an expression that seemed to say, "This is hopeless." "Great," Jackson muttered as they gathered for their first planning meeting. "We were going to have the perfect team until they stuck us with dead weight." Williams tried to be more diplomatic, but her frustration was obvious. "Look, Sarah, we know you have struggled with these exercises, but this is really important for all of us. Can you please just try to follow our lead and not do anything that will mess up our mission?" Sarah nodded quietly, feeling smaller and more useless than ever. She wanted to tell them that she would try her hardest, that she wanted to succeed just as much as they did. But she knew her words would be meaningless after weeks of failures. The team spent the rest of the week planning their approach to the rescue mission. Jackson would be the team leader and handle communication with headquarters. Williams would manage the tactical decisions and coordinate their movements through the compound. Chen would handle security and watch for enemy threats while they moved. Sarah was given the simplest job possible: carry extra equipment and stay close to the team without getting in their way. Even with such a basic role, Sarah felt nervous about letting her teammates down. She studied the mission plans every night, memorizing the layout of the compound and reviewing every detail of their strategy. She practiced moving quietly and carrying the heavy equipment pack until her shoulders ached. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, with thick clouds hanging low over the training area. The rescue compound had been built to look like a real enemy facility, complete with guard towers, multiple buildings, and hidden defensive positions. Smoke machines created an atmosphere of danger, and the sound effects of distant explosions made everything feel like actual combat. Team Charlie gathered at their starting position along with the other teams. Sarah could see the confidence and determination on the faces of her teammates as they made final preparations. Other teams looked equally ready and focused. Sarah was the only person who looked scared and uncertain. "Remember the plan," Jackson whispered as they prepared to begin. "We enter through the east fence, move to the main building, locate the hostages in the basement, and extract through the north exit. Sarah, just stay behind us and do not do anything unless we tell you to." The whistle blew and the exercise began. Everything went wrong from the very first moments. As Team Charlie approached the compound fence, they were supposed to move in a single file line with each person covering a different direction. Sarah was supposed to watch behind them for enemy patrols, but she became distracted by smoke effects and loud noises coming from other parts of the training area. She completely missed the enemy observer in a tower who spotted their approach and radioed their position to other defenders. Because of Sarah's failure to detect the observer, Team Charlie lost the element of surprise they needed for their mission to succeed. Enemy forces were waiting for them when they tried to enter the compound. The situation got worse when they reached the main building. Williams had planned a careful approach that would allow them to avoid most of the enemy positions, but Sarah forgot the route they had practiced. Instead of following the planned path along the east wall, Sarah went toward the main entrance where several enemy defenders were positioned. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Williams hissed urgently. "You are supposed to go left, not right." But it was too late. Sarah's wrong turn had led the entire team directly into the most heavily defended area of the compound. Enemy simulation weapons began firing paint bullets at them from multiple directions. Chen tried to return fire while Jackson attempted to lead them to better cover, but Sarah panicked completely. Instead of taking cover like her teammates, Sarah stood frozen in the middle of the firefight. Paint bullets splattered against the wall next to her head, marking near misses that would have been fatal wounds in real combat. Jackson had to grab her arm and physically drag her behind a concrete barrier. "Get down and stay down," Jackson shouted over the sound of simulated gunfire. "You are going to get all of us killed." The team managed to fight their way into the building, but they had already lost precious time and used most of their ammunition dealing with enemies they should have avoided completely. When they finally reached the basement where the hostages were supposed to be located, they discovered that Sarah had forgotten to bring the bolt cutters they needed to break the chains holding the hostages. "The bolt cutters, Sarah," William said desperately. "Where are the bolt cutters you were supposed to carry?" Sarah looked down at her equipment pack in horror. In her nervousness that morning, she had forgotten to pack one of the most important tools for the mission. The bolt cutters were sitting unused back at the supply area. Williams had to use her rifle to break the chains, which took several extra minutes and made enough noise to alert more enemy defenders to their location. By the time they freed the hostages and began moving toward the extraction point, they were far behind schedule and under heavy enemy fire. The final disaster happened at the extraction point. Sarah was supposed to provide security while the hostages were loaded into the rescue vehicle, but she became confused about which direction she should be watching. When an enemy patrol approached from her assigned sector, she failed to spot them until they were close enough to capture one of the hostages. The exercise ended with Team Charlie receiving the lowest score in the history of the training program. They had failed to complete the mission, lost one hostage, and would have suffered multiple casualties if it had been real combat. As they walked back to the debriefing area, Sarah could see the anger and disappointment radiating from her teammates. Other teams had succeeded in their missions and were celebrating their victories. Team Charlie walked in complete silence, their heads down in shame. 16 weeks of training wasted because of one person, Jackson said finally, his voice full of bitter anger. "We could have been the best team here, but instead we are the biggest failure." That evening, Sarah sat alone in her barrack room with a pen and paper, writing the hardest letter she had ever written. It was a formal request for voluntary discharge from the military training program. She had tried everything she could think of to become a soldier, but some dreams were simply impossible to achieve. As she sealed the envelope, Sarah felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Tomorrow she would hand in her letter and begin the process of leaving the Army forever. Part 4. The Commander's Unexpected Order. Sarah woke up on Monday morning with her discharge letter tucked under her pillow, ready to hand it to Commander Williams as soon as she could find him. She had barely slept all weekend, thinking about how she would explain her decision to quit to her father and brother. The shame felt like a heavy weight in her chest. But she knew it was better to leave now than to continue failing and dragging down other soldiers. During breakfast in the mess hall, Sarah sat alone as usual, picking at her scrambled eggs without much appetite. She watched the other recruits discussing their weekend leave and making plans for the upcoming week of training. Team Charlie sat at their regular table, but they did not even glance in her direction. After Friday's disaster, they treated her like she did not exist at all. At exactly 8 in the morning, all the recruits gathered in the main assembly area for what they expected would be a normal Monday briefing. Commander Williams usually started each week by reviewing the training schedule and announcing any changes to their programs. Sarah planned to approach him after the meeting to submit her discharge request, but when Commander Williams stepped up to the podium, something was different about his expression. Instead of his usual serious but routine manner, he looked like someone who was about to deliver important and unexpected news. "Good morning, soldiers," Commander Williams began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent assembly hall. "I have an announcement that will affect the training schedule for the next several weeks. Due to budget constraints and scheduling conflicts with other military units, we are implementing some changes to your program." Sarah felt her heart sink. Changes usually meant more difficult training or additional requirements that she would definitely fail. Maybe it would be better to submit her discharge letter before these new challenges began. "Starting today," the commander continued, "we are dividing this platoon into 2 groups. Half of you will continue with standard tactical and combat training as planned. The other half will be temporarily assigned to work with the base medical unit to learn emergency response and battlefield medicine." A murmur of confusion spread through the assembled recruits. This was not normal military training protocol. Medical training was usually reserved for soldiers who had already completed basic combat certification and chosen specialized career paths. Commander Williams raised his hand for silence. The medical training program is not less important than combat training. In modern military operations, the ability to treat wounded soldiers and save lives under dangerous conditions is just as critical as the ability to fight. The soldiers selected for medical training will learn trauma response, patient evacuation, crisis management, and emergency surgery assistance. Sarah listened with growing confusion and concern. She had never heard of recruits being split up like this during basic training. It sounded like some soldiers were being removed from the real military training program and put into something different and possibly easier. When I call your name, step forward for medical training assignment, Commander Williams announced, pulling out a clipboard with a list of names. Martinez. Sarah. Sarah felt her stomach drop as her name was called first. Of course she would be sent to the medical program. It was probably where they put the recruits who could not handle real soldier training. This felt like another form of failure, just with a different name. 8 other names were called after Sarah's. She recognized most of them as recruits who had struggled in various areas of training. Private Morrison, who was afraid of heights and failed all the climbing exercises. Private Kim, who got motion sickness during vehicle operations. Private Torres, who had trouble with weapons maintenance. They were the group of soldiers who could not succeed in normal military roles. As the selected recruits gathered together, Sarah could see the disappointed and confused looks on their faces. This felt like being separated from the real soldiers and put into a backup program for people who were not good enough for actual military service. Report to the base hospital at 0900 hours, Commander Williams ordered. You will be working with Dr. Chen, the head of emergency medical services. Your training will be just as intensive and demanding as combat training, but it will focus on different skills. After the assembly ended, Sarah walked slowly toward the hospital building with the other medical trainees. She still had her discharge letter in her pocket, but now she was unsure about when to submit it. Maybe she should try this medical training first, even though it felt like being pushed aside from real military service. The base hospital was a modern building with white walls and the clean smell of medical equipment. Dr. Chen met them in the lobby, a small woman with kind eyes who wore military medical uniform with captain's insignia. Sarah had expected someone who would treat them like failed soldiers, but Dr. Chen smiled warmly as she introduced herself. Welcome to emergency medical training, Dr. Chen said, her voice friendly but professional. I know this assignment probably seems unusual to you, but I want you to understand something important. In my 15 years of military medicine, I have seen more lives saved by skilled medics than by any other type of soldier. What you will learn here could make the difference between life and death for your fellow service members. Dr. Chen led them to a training room that looked like a hospital emergency department. There were medical beds, monitoring equipment, surgical tools, and mannequins designed to simulate injured patients with various types of wounds and medical emergencies. Your first lesson will be basic trauma assessment, Dr. Chen explained. In combat situations, medics often have to treat multiple wounded soldiers at the same time. You must learn to quickly determine who needs immediate treatment, who can wait, and who is beyond help. This process is called triage, and it requires clear thinking under extreme pressure. Sarah found herself paying close attention as Dr. Chen demonstrated how to check for different types of injuries. For the first time in weeks, she felt genuinely interested in what she was learning instead of just trying to survive until the end of the lesson. The training mannequins were designed to simulate realistic battle injuries. Some had simulated gunshot wounds, others had broken bones or severe burns. Dr. Chen showed them how to quickly assess each patient's condition by checking vital signs, looking for obvious injuries and determining the severity of their situation. Martinez, Dr. Chen called out, come forward and assess this patient. Sarah approached a mannequin that had been set up to simulate a soldier with multiple injuries from an explosion. She felt the familiar nervousness that usually made her freeze during training exercises, but something was different this time. Instead of panic, she felt focused curiosity about the patient's condition. Following Dr. Chen's instructions, Sarah began checking the mannequin methodically. She looked for signs of breathing problems, checked for bleeding, tested responses to see if the patient was conscious. As she worked, She found herself naturally prioritizing which problems needed immediate attention and which could be treated later. "Very good, Martinez," Dr. Chen said with genuine approval. "You identified the most serious injuries first and followed proper assessment protocol. Your approach was calm and systematic." Sarah felt a strange sensation she had not experienced since arriving at basic training: pride in her performance. For the first time, an instructor had given her positive feedback instead of criticism or disappointment. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah participated in several medical simulation exercises. She learned to stop bleeding, stabilize broken bones, and prepare patients for emergency evacuation. Unlike the combat drills that always left her confused and panicked, the medical training seemed to make sense to her naturally. When Private Kim struggled to remember the steps for treating a chest wound, Sarah found herself helping him understand the procedure. When Private Torres got overwhelmed by a complex patient with multiple injuries, Sarah calmly suggested they work together to prioritize the treatment steps. Dr. Chen watched Sarah's interactions with growing interest. At the end of the first day, she pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "Martinez, I have a question for you," Dr. Chen said. "Have you ever considered a career in medical field before joining the Army?" Sarah shook her head. "No, doctor. I always thought I would be a regular soldier like my father and brother. I never really thought about medical work." Dr. Chen smiled thoughtfully. "Well, you might want to start thinking about it. You showed more natural aptitude for emergency medicine today than some soldiers who have been studying it for months." Walking back to her barracks that evening, Sarah felt confused, but also cautiously hopeful. She still had the discharge letter in her pocket. But for the first time since arriving at basic training, she was not completely certain she wanted to quit. Part 5. The Stunning Revelation. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah began medical training, and everything in her military experience had changed completely. Each morning, she woke up eager to learn new skills instead of dreading another day of failure. The medical training center had become a place where she felt confident and capable, instead of lost and hopeless. Dr. Chen had been watching Sarah's progress with growing amazement. In every single medical exercise, Sarah performed at levels that seemed impossible for someone with no previous medical experience. When they practiced treating multiple wounded soldiers in chaotic battlefield conditions, Sarah remained calm and focused while other trainees panicked and made mistakes. During a particularly challenging simulation, Sarah had to treat 5 different patients with serious injuries, while enemy fire sounds played loudly through speakers and smoke filled the training room. She moved between patients quickly but carefully, making life or death decisions about who needed immediate surgery and who could wait for treatment. Her assessment was perfect in every case. "Martinez has diagnosed and prioritized every patient correctly," Dr. Chen announced to the other instructors who had gathered to watch the exercise. She completed the triage in half the time of most experienced medics. Sarah felt proud but also confused by her own success. How could she be so good at medical work when she had failed at every other aspect of military training? She had always believed she was simply not smart enough or strong enough to be a soldier. But the medical training proved that her mind could work quickly and accurately under pressure. The other medical trainees had begun looking to Sarah for leadership and guidance. Private Morrison, who had been afraid of heights, turned out to be excellent at patient transportation once Sarah showed him techniques for staying calm. Private Kim, who got motion sickness, became skilled at medical equipment maintenance when Sarah helped him organize his work systematically. But the biggest surprise came during their advanced trauma training. Dr. Chen had arranged a realistic simulation where the trainees had to respond to a bombing incident with dozens of wounded soldiers. It was the kind of chaotic, high-pressure situation that would challenge even experienced military medics. Sarah took charge of the situation naturally. She organized the other trainees into teams, assigned specific responsibilities to each person, and coordinated their efforts to treat the maximum number of patients in the shortest time. Her calm voice and clear instructions helped everyone perform better than they ever had before. "Outstanding work, Martinez," Dr. Chen said after the exercise ended. "You showed natural leadership abilities and medical judgment that usually takes years to develop." That afternoon, Dr. Chen called Sarah into her office for what Sarah expected would be another routine evaluation. Instead, Dr. Chen had a serious expression on her face and gestured for Sarah to take a seat across from her desk. "Sarah, I need to tell you something important," Dr. Chen began. Your assignment to medical training was not random, and it was not because you failed at combat exercises. Sarah felt confused. I do not understand, Doctor. I was assigned here because I could not pass any tactical drills. Dr. Chen smiled and shook her head. That is not true. Commander Williams specifically requested that you be assigned to my program because he had been watching your performance very carefully. Dr. Chen pulled out a thick folder from her desk drawer. It contained detailed reports about Sarah's behavior during every training exercise she had participated in since arriving at basic training. Look at this report from your first room clearing exercise, Dr. Chen said, pointing to a page full of notes. The instructor noted that you hesitated to engage targets not because you were scared, but because you were trying to determine if they represented actual threats or innocent people. You were more concerned about avoiding harm than about completing the mission quickly. Sarah read the report with growing surprise. She had never seen these detailed observations before. Dr. Chen continued reading from other reports. During urban warfare simulation, you froze when your teammates came under fire because your instinct was to help them rather than continue fighting. In night operations, you got lost because you were listening for sounds of distress from other soldiers instead of focusing on navigation. Sarah felt her understanding of herself beginning to change. But I failed all those exercises. You failed them as combat exercises, Dr. Chen explained, but you succeeded as someone whose primary concern is protecting and helping others, rather than defeating enemies. Commander Williams recognized that you have the mind and heart of a healer, not a warrior. The next morning, Commander Williams himself visited the medical training center. Sarah had not spoken to him since that first day when her name was called for medical assignment. She still felt nervous around him, remembering all her failures during combat training. Martinez, walk with me, Commander Williams said, leading her outside to a quiet area behind the hospital building. Dr. Chen has been giving me regular reports about your progress in medical training, the commander began. Your performance has been exceptional, which is exactly what I expected when I assigned you to this program. Sarah found the courage to ask the question that had been bothering her for weeks. Sir, why did you really assign me to medical training? Was it because I was not good enough for regular soldier duties? Commander Williams stopped walking and turned to face her directly. Martinez, some soldiers are born to fight enemies and destroy things. Other soldiers are born to save lives and repair what has been broken. Both types are equally important to the military, but they require completely different abilities and mindsets. The commander explained that he had been watching Sarah struggle with combat training and noticed that all her failures had the same pattern. She was not failing because she was incompetent or cowardly. She was failing because her natural instincts were focused on protecting life rather than taking it. In combat situations, good soldiers must be able to act quickly and aggressively without thinking too much about consequences, Commander Williams said. But in medical situations, good medics must think carefully about every action and prioritize saving lives above everything else. Your mind naturally works the second way, which made you terrible at combat but potentially excellent at medicine. 3 months later, Sarah graduated at the top of her medical training class. She had learned advanced trauma surgery, battlefield medicine, patient evacuation procedures, and medical crisis management. Her final scores were the highest the program had ever recorded. The graduation ceremony was held in the main assembly hall where Sarah had first heard her name called for medical training. This time, when Commander Williams called her name, she walked forward with confidence and pride instead of shame and confusion. But the biggest surprise came after the ceremony ended. Private Jackson, Private Williams, and Private Chen from her old team. Charlie approached Sarah with expressions she had never seen from them before. Instead of frustration or disappointment, they looked at her with respect and admiration. Sarah, Jackson said, extending his hand for a handshake. We heard about your medical training scores. We wanted to apologize for how we treated you before, and to ask if you would consider being assigned to our unit when we get deployed. Williams nodded in agreement. We realized that having the best medic in the program on our team would be more valuable than having another combat soldier. In real situations, we would rather have you watching our backs than anyone else. 6 months later, medic Sarah Martinez was deployed overseas with her first military unit. The same soldiers who had once avoided working with her now specifically requested her for their missions. In her first year of active duty, Sarah saved the lives of 17 wounded soldiers under combat conditions. earning commendations for bravery and medical excellence. Sarah had finally found her place in the military, not as the soldier her father had been, but as the healer she was always meant to become. She learned that success was not about being good at everything, but about finding the one thing you were born to do and doing it better than anyone else could. Part 6. The ultimate test. 18 months after her graduation from medical training, combat medic Sarah Martinez found herself in the most dangerous situation of her military career. She crouched behind a concrete barrier in the middle of a war-torn city, listening to the sound of gunfire echoing through the narrow streets. Her medical pack felt heavy on her shoulders, filled with supplies that might mean the difference between life and death. For the soldiers depending on her, Sarah's unit had been deployed to provide humanitarian aid in a region where fighting between opposing forces had left thousands of civilians trapped without medical care. What was supposed to be a peaceful mission had turned into active combat when enemy forces launched a surprise attack on their convoy just hours after they arrived in the city. Sergeant Jackson, her old teammate from basic training, crawled over to where Sarah was positioned. His face was covered with dust and sweat, and she could see the concern in his eyes as he spoke quietly, to avoid being heard by enemy forces nearby. "Sarah, we have a serious problem," Jackson said, pointing toward a damaged building about 50 meters away. "Williams and Chen are trapped in there with 3 wounded civilians. They were trying to evacuate a family when the attack started, and now they cannot get out safely." Sarah looked at the building Jackson was pointing toward. It was a 3-story apartment complex that had been hit by several explosions. Smoke was rising from broken windows, and she could see that part of the roof had collapsed. Enemy snipers were positioned in surrounding buildings, making any movement in the open extremely dangerous. "How many wounded do we have?" Sarah asked, already checking her medical supplies and mentally preparing for what she would need to treat multiple patients under combat conditions. Williams reported 3 civilians with serious injuries from the explosion, Jackson replied. 1 child with possible internal bleeding, 1 elderly man with a broken leg and chest trauma, and 1 woman with severe burns on her arms and face. Chen is also injured but still mobile. Sarah felt the familiar calm focus that had developed during her medical training. While the combat situation around her was chaotic and frightening, the prospect of treating wounded people made her mind sharp and clear. This was exactly the kind of situation she had trained for, even though it was far more dangerous than any simulation she had practiced. "What about extraction?" Sarah asked. "How do we get the patients out of there once I stabilize them?" Jackson pointed to an armored vehicle parked behind another building. "We have a medical evacuation transport ready, but we cannot move it closer because of the sniper positions. You would have to treat the patients in that building and then help carry them about 100 meters to reach safety." The plan was dangerous, but possible. Sarah would have to cross 50 meters of open ground to reach the trapped soldiers and civilians, provide medical treatment under enemy fire, and then help evacuate everyone back to the transport vehicle. Any mistake could result in her own death or the death of the people she was trying to save. "I need covering fire for the approach and extraction," Sarah said, her voice steady and professional. "And I need someone to help me carry the more seriously wounded patients." Jackson nodded and began coordinating with the other soldiers in their unit. Within minutes, they had developed a plan that would give Sarah the best chance of reaching the building safely and completing her mission. Private Morrison, who had also been assigned to their unit after completing medical training, volunteered to accompany Sarah on the rescue mission. He had become an excellent medical transport specialist and had worked with Sarah on dozens of previous operations. "Ready when you are, Medic Martinez," Morrison said, checking his own medical supplies and preparing to follow Sarah across the dangerous open ground. Sarah took a deep breath and reviewed everything she knew about treating the types of injuries Jackson had described. Internal bleeding would require immediate pressure and possibly emergency surgery. Chest trauma needed careful monitoring of breathing and potential punctured lungs. Severe burns required pain management and fluid replacement to prevent shock. "Covering fire in 3, 2, 1, Jackson announced over the radio. Immediately, Sarah's unit began firing at the enemy positions to keep the snipers busy, while Sarah and Morrison ran toward the damaged building. Sarah had never moved so fast in her life, carrying heavy medical equipment while staying low to avoid enemy fire. They reached the building entrance just as a sniper bullet hit the concrete wall inches from Sarah's head. Morrison pulled her inside the doorway, and they both took a moment to catch their breath before climbing the stairs to find Williams, Chen, and the wounded civilians. Sarah found them on the second floor of the building, trapped in what had once been someone's living room. Williams was applying pressure to a bleeding wound on the elderly man's chest, while Chen held a small girl who was barely conscious. A woman sat against the wall, her arms wrapped in torn clothing that was soaked with blood from her burns. "Sarah, thank God you made it," Williams said with obvious relief. "The girl's condition is getting worse, and I think the old man might have internal injuries." Sarah immediately went to work assessing each patient's condition. The child had signs of internal bleeding and was going into shock from blood loss. The elderly man had a punctured lung that was making breathing difficult. The woman's burns were serious but not immediately life-threatening if treated properly. Working quickly, Sarah began treating the most critical patient first. She started an intravenous line on the child to replace lost fluids and gave her medication to maintain blood pressure. Then she inserted a chest tube into the elderly man's lung to help him breathe more easily. "Morrison, I need you to monitor the child's vital signs while I work on burn treatment for the woman," Sarah instructed, her hands moving expertly as she cleaned and bandaged the woman's injuries. For 20 minutes, Sarah worked in the damaged building while enemy fire continued outside. She stabilized all 3 patients enough for transport, coordinated their evacuation with the soldiers providing cover fire, and personally carried the child across the dangerous open ground to reach the medical transport vehicle. During the evacuation, Sarah had to stop twice to provide emergency treatment when the elderly man's breathing became critical and the child's blood pressure dropped dangerously low. Both times, her quick medical intervention saved their lives. When they finally reached the field hospital at the main base, Dr. Chen was waiting to receive the casualties. As Sarah transferred the patients to the hospital medical team, Dr. Chen looked at her with pride and amazement. "Outstanding work, Medic Martinez," Dr. Chen said. "You saved 3 lives today under the most dangerous conditions possible. The child required immediate surgery for internal bleeding, and she would have died within another hour without your treatment." Later that evening, as Sarah cleaned her medical equipment and prepared her report on the mission, Commander Williams visited her at the medical station. "Martinez, I have received reports from every soldier who participated in today's mission," Commander Williams said. "Your performance under enemy fire was exactly what I hoped to see when I first assigned you to medical training 2 years ago." The commander explained that Sarah's actions during the rescue mission had demonstrated not only excellent medical skills but also the kind of courage and leadership that the military needed in its combat medics. "You are being recommended for the Bronze Star Medal for heroic achievement in combat," Commander Williams announced. "More importantly, you are being promoted to Staff Sergeant and offered a position training new combat medics." That night, Sarah wrote a letter to her father for the first time since joining the military. She told him about her mission, her promotion, and how she had finally found her place as a soldier who saves lives instead of taking them. A week later, she received a response from her father that brought tears to her eyes. "I have never been more proud of you," he wrote. "You have become exactly the kind of soldier the world needs most."